Yes, it's absolutely not a technology talk, and I hope that's okay. Feel free to leave. Hopefully it'll be entertaining anyway, and some of this will resonate with you if you've worked in a larger company. There was a couple of things that inspired me to do this, and I'll explain those in a minute. But what it's really about is not cloud native on the technical side, but what it means as an organization to actually work in that way. Like, what do people have to do when they're organized into this hierarchy and they've been thrown together and they have all these institutionalized beliefs and they suddenly have to start working in a new way. So a little bit about me. I've spent the best part of the last decade working in enterprises that were service providers, and particularly ones that are telcos. And the interesting thing about telcos is that they are especially inert. So they basically haven't innovated for about 100 years. You could say that they're institutionally structured to kill innovation. And this makes it quite difficult if you're the kind of person who's been employed in those organizations or with them, working with them, to try and introduce new ideas. So that was my first inspiration for this talk. The next inspiration was in Berlin when I went to CF Summit and Colin was speaking. And his was one of several talks that sort of got me thinking, because I was sitting at the airport and I was thinking, well, what was my sort of takeaway from this? The Americans say, what's your takeaway from this presentation? And I was thinking, it seems to be so much about this that's a big question mark, this unanswered thing about people, and how do we get the people to consume this technology and start using it properly inside their organizations? And Colin said this, he did a presentation called, was it called Changing the Enterprise, I think? Yeah, was this right?
Pivotal.
Yeah.
Backgrounds to prove it.
So Cloud Native Enterprise, a venture capitalist creating continuous innovation powered by Cloud Foundry, or some other PaaS, presumably. Now, that was my sort of next inspiration. And then, I thought, well, let's do a talk. And I arranged my notes and did this presentation. And this is how it's supposed to work. So apologies if this isn't the running order we go through and if I start rambling. So we're going to start off by looking at the problem space. We'll really explore why this is an issue and why people can't just adopt these ideas and start using these technologies. And then look at sort of the objective of this quest. So these guys here, sometimes I felt like these sort of looking up, these guys looking up at the castle and having things thrown at me. What is it that we're really aiming for in terms of the shape of the organization and the things that have to happen within it? And if you're going to start doing that, if you're going to try and lead change inside a large organization, and you're an explorer and a crusader, what might you need to look out for and what tactics can you use to overcome those challenges? And because I'm a complete amateur at this, I've also pointed you to some professional help and sort of good resources and talks and books that you can read to find out more about this sort of thing. So, enterprises. What are enterprises? Well, they're these big things that are run by gentlemen with beards and top hats, and they look like this, and they make real money, and they've got these, as Colin pointed out, they've got these advantages over startups. So they've got customers that they can learn stuff from, and they have the money to actually get stuff done. So what is their problem? Why do they have this problem with living in the 21st century where we're all supposed to be continuously innovating and learning from our customers and just cranking out stuff that's useful for them? Well, enterprises don't seem to know very much. They haven't been paying attention. So they've never heard that Mark Andreessen quote. Now, for most people in this room, it's harder to not know that than it is just to know it, right? Software is eating the world, and every single person has said it for the last 2 years. So how could you have not heard about that? And how could you have not heard about Conway? I mean, like, this has been in every microservices talk for the last 2 years. Cloud has happened, it's turned the world upside down, everything's changed, and these companies are in a fight for their lives, but they don't seem to be aware of it. So what's been going on here? So here's the thing. Enterprises are just legal fictions, right? They're not a sort of being that has feelings, and they don't want anything. So when an enterprise IT salesperson tells you, enterprises want this, no, they don't. No enterprise ever wanted anything. People want things, And in enterprises, people want lots of different things, and they're very confused and they're conflicted, and they're serving the hierarchy, and they're all pulling in different directions. So that's really what it's about. It's about people wanting to do stuff. Now, we know the characteristics that we're looking for. So a lot has been discussed about this, and you know, people like Simon Wardley and Bob Marshall and people that I follow on Twitter, you know, have been saying a lot. And fairly recently, McKinsey came out with this nice little quadrant, which kind of sums up where you need to go. If you're, you know, rubbish, you're in this corner, and then if you're good but slow, you're in that corner. And then you go up to the top right if you want to get really fast, but also have this structure behind you. And, you know, there's all these tenets that you would have to be an agile enterprise. And I tried to sort of summarize those into 3 things for this talk that I thought were important, so that we have that sort of list of objectives of things that we're heading for in the enterprise. So let's go and get these things. Let's go and find out what they are. So the first thing is purpose, not profits. Now, purpose is really, really useful and really, really powerful because it motivates people to get out of bed and come into work in the morning. And humans respond a lot better when they've got this kind of connection to that higher purpose. And it's also really useful because it scales. So as Diana of Portland, who I stole this slide from, I'm sorry to her, but it was just so good. Once everybody knows why the organization exists, it acts like a kind of filter on their decision making, so they can act autonomously. And having been in a lot of organizations where there's no sense of purpose, and people think that money is the purpose of the organization, anything goes. So, you know, any business case is considered. As long as it makes money, we'll just do it. And people are all over the place. There's no sense of what you're really trying to achieve for your customers. So yeah, totally agree with that. Purpose is great. Once you've got purpose, you can start measuring outcomes. So you can stop thinking about the outputs of your IT projects and start thinking about the difference that those things make. The normal way of handling this is to measure things in enterprises by the outputs of the project. So what happens is you commit to delivering a thing right at the beginning when you've got no information and you haven't learnt anything yet, and then you are held accountable for delivering that thing regardless of whether or not it's right. And that's your measure of success. The sort of new thinking is that you don't think about the thing, think about what you're trying to achieve in your outcomes, which help you deliver your purpose, and then you decide on a metric for your outcome and you measure that. And this is quite good because it masks the things, and you can change behind the scenes what you're delivering if it turns out inevitably that your first idea was rubbish. So you can, as long as you're delivering the same outcome, you can change what you're doing in terms of outputs. Definitely agree with that one. Good. Products, not projects. So this is probably one of the key ideas of all the things I've been reading that is most widely discussed. So this is where your sort of 2 pizza teams and autonomous, you know, service-owning teams come into things. So you build these small cross-functional teams. You don't have function-specific teams spread across an org chart. You have everyone you need to deliver and run something in one team, and the people in that team live with the consequences of what they're doing. And a product obviously persists over time. It doesn't start and end like a project. It's something that you live with, and ideally, because you're living with the consequences of your actions, you'll make better decisions, because you make very different decisions when you've got consequences from them. So that's great as well, and that totally makes sense. So it's easy, right? Why would anyone not want to do this stuff? It's completely obvious. We know what the problem is, we know what's wrong, we know where we need to get to, so we know what the shape of our organization looks like and how people should interact. What's stopping us getting there? So humans and the behavior is really the issue here. There's a couple of great quotes that I picked out. So we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. That was Anais Nin who said that. She's an author. And that was sort of paraphrased and I was brought to my attention by Bob Marshall, who then said, people's behaviours are a product of their beliefs about how to get their needs met. But once you understand that, you can do some very interesting things with your organisation if you've got the means to do it. because you can start gaming the behavior and the culture of the organization. One good example of this would be Netflix. So they very famously did things like they wanted to get rid of the data centers and get into AWS. So to make that happen, they said, if you want to deploy some software and it's going to go into the data center, you've got to write a 10-page business case. But if you want to do it into AWS, you can do it right now, no questions asked. That immediately changes people's behavior, because what you're doing is you're raising the barrier to the things that you don't want to happen, and you're lowering the barrier to the things that you do want to happen. And humans will just kind of keep doing the same thing that they've learned to do. They're like sort of the machines in the Tomorrow's World maze where they're bumping into walls and they're just going around. They will learn the path and they will just keep doing that thing until you give them a better path. So definitely agree with this. You can change human behavior, and this is something you can try to do. So this is a challenge, but this is something you can try and do. You can change the behavior of the organization. Now, this is another obstacle that you might find when trying to actually implement some of these ideas. So commercial success. A hat tip to JP Rangaswamy for uncovering this one from Peter Drucker. No financial man will ever understand business because financial people think that a company makes money. A company doesn't make money, it makes shoes. Shoes are real and money is the result. It's not the purpose. This is a really, really difficult one to solve because it's kind of ingrained into the dogma of a century of business thinking. The only way you're going to be able to change this is with exceptional leadership, in the organization. You've got to, if you're not already at the top, you're going to have to sort of make executive friends to try and change this thinking, because it all filters down from this. This is kind of something that I've learned to appreciate. One of the things that these guys love is business cases, and a business case is a cast iron way of stopping things from happening. The other thing about a business case is that it actually doesn't do the thing it's supposed to do, which is reduce risk. So the business case is really intended to, it focuses and obsesses over the cost of things, but cost is not what affects the return on investment for the organization. The things that ROI is sensitive to are, will this project actually be cancelled? And will the thing we are trying to produce ever actually be used? Those are the things that affect whether you're going to get ROI on your investment, not how much it costs. But nevertheless, that is what business cases focus on. This was something that caught my eye as well. I thought this really summed it up for me as well. So it's the process for getting things done is actually the process for ensuring it never gets done. That's basically what a business case is in my experience. Now, to get around this problem, what you can do is basically not spend any money. I mean, it's a bit of a cop-out, but you need to find ways of getting your things done using existing budget or things or existing people, growing talent, not trying to have to recruit people in to get your stuff done. And this one, I think, is probably really the last big obstacle that you might find when you're on your quest to change the organization as a leader and a change agent. The structure of big companies is always optimized because the financial guys are chasing their metrics for the investors. They're really thinking about, they're serving the hierarchy. I forgot to say this. The natural human behavior is to serve the hierarchy of the organization above all else. So even if someone's got a great idea and you are really inspired by that, your first task is to stop getting shouted at by your boss and make sure you're going to keep getting paid and not get fired. That will always override everything, and it goes all the way to the top, even if you're the CEO, because your job is to make sure the EBITDA looks good and to make sure the revenue figures look good. And if you're chasing efficiency, you're going to start doing things like organizing teams into function-specific teams so you don't duplicate resources. And when you do that, of course, what you're doing is creating all of these invisible handoffs between teams, because that just creates lots of queues and ultimately nothing gets done. What you can try and do is just actually try and form an autonomous team anyway. If you find yourself in a situation and it's a real challenge, what you can do is either use the executive friends that you've won and try to influence them to let you do a new initiative with a two-pizza team, or just do it sort of as a skunk works and see if you can keep it going long enough that you can prove the outcomes of being successful from that. So all of these ideas that I've presented are good, but you have to be very careful. Because you're dealing with human emotions and people aren't rational, you might not always get the reaction that you want. And I've been into some sort of evangelist-style meetings where I was supposed to be, talking about these new ideas, and it just felt like when I walked into the room, all of these bats and this cloud of dust had flown out. I was like, where have you guys been for the last decade? How come you not just know this stuff already? And of course, it's a natural reaction when you're in this kind of environment to assume that people they're just a bit stupid if they don't know this stuff already, that laggards are bad, but that isn't necessarily the case. You really have to not go riding in there as the white knight to kind of enlighten everyone. I stuck this in at the last minute, as I said. Rest in peace, Alan Rickman, of course. Expect negative reactions. You're not always going to get the positive response that you need to your kind of attempts to introduce these new ideas. And this is something that I picked up on as well. Fear tactics don't work, not in the long term, right? It's not sustainable to scare people or companies or managers or your colleagues into doing stuff, otherwise for fear of death or extinction. You can't say you're going to get out of business. You're going to, some new Uber is going to put you out of business unless you start doing this stuff. Because what happens when you do that is that the way the human mind reacts is it sort of wakes up for a little bit and then it just tries to filter that stuff out because it's just another thing on a long list of worries that you have in your life that you don't want to have to think about. So you just go into denial. And I've seen that quite a lot as well. So you've got to flip it over and say, no, doing this thing is actually going to improve your life. Don't forget about the fact that not doing it is going to kill you. Doing it is going to really make things better for you, so you should do it. There's something else this year actually I discovered the work of this lady, Linda Rising, and the book that she co-authored called Fearless Change, or More Fearless Change was the sequel to that. And there's a great talk about this which explains things far better than I can on Vimeo. It was at Pipeline Conference last year. The other thing I would recommend if you're interested in this and you want to try and lead some change in your organization would be the stuff that Jez Humble has been talking about. And of course, those two talks are linked with these books, which you should read as well. So yeah, Lean Enterprise and More Fearless Change, both excellent. And that's it. Probably rattled through that quite quickly. Any questions? Didn't really cover any technology, so technical questions, but.
Can you recap the stuff that's good we should do?
The good stuff?
The good stuff.
Yeah, so where was that? So those three things. Yeah. So yeah, stop thinking about how much money you're making. Of course, that's something which a lot of enterprises that I've seen and worked in, they don't have any metrics of measuring things that aren't financial. So it makes it incredibly difficult to get a new initiative off the ground, a new product idea, before it makes any money, because it's not recognized unless it makes money. And of course, if you switch to innovation accounting, where you're actually measuring engagement or the success of or the rate of growth in customers and things like that, then you can find other metrics.
Another awesome book called How to Measure Anything.
Yes, I haven't read that one yet. That is a good one. And Beyond Budgeting as well, I think deals with some of this stuff.
It's really important to get people to jump out that mindset of just looking at the bottom line, as tempting as it is, obviously. But in terms of you genuinely want to transform your business, you've got to think about the metrics that matter.
Yes. The other thing that I identified was outcomes, not outputs. So, not focusing on the thing that's being delivered in the sort of project mindset, because that will change inevitably. If you're properly learning about stuff, then you will change the thing you're doing, but you shouldn't be changing the outcome you want for the business, because that feeds into the purpose of your business. Yes.
Were there any examples change an organisation and just hasn't worked out? I mean, were there some things in particular that you didn't do which you've advocated for, which caused the whole thing just to fall over? I mean, without,
yeah, the gaping void cartoon was probably what sums it up. Really, it's kind of been one or two instances of that happening where I'm just sort of going in there and saying, "You'd be crazy not to do this. You know, you're under so much threat here. You've got to do these things." And it really does. Even at any level in the business, as I said, you are not going to get a sustained good response to that. People will wake up and then they'll just shut down straight away.
Can I ask the corollary to that question, where have you actually had success with any of these things? Successfully changed a business with any of these?
Not at any sort of scale, no.
So it's interesting.
But I think that's what we're trying to achieve, right? We're not just trying to get one team to do this stuff in isolation. We want to change the organisation.
Really enjoyed the talk, thank you very much. But what I have to say is, I feel this is a talk where it needs to be given to CEOs. If you give it to anyone else but CEOs, then you're going to be swinging against the tide. There's nothing you can do. And the CEOs, unfortunately, are beholden to shareholders, and the shareholders only ever care about how much money you're making.
Yes.
This is endemic in the way in which we build companies, not even company structure. Companies are owned by shareholders. Shareholders say, "Where's my money? Where's my money? Where's my money?"
Yeah.
If the CEO's not making money, they get sacked.
Just as Humble talks about, and then he says that it's like a fiduciary duty, whatever, in the US to actually maximise shareholder value,
Yeah.
which is a complete short-term win, but not for long-term.
I think we've almost encoded all these problems in the law.
Yeah.
A lot of it is also about, I mean, fiduciary duty doesn't tell you what time frame you have to maximize shareholder value over. So the big problem is that you used to have a lot of people who purchased and held companies for 20 or 30 years and then retired on it. Now you have these pathological investors where they're flipping everything within 6 months.
Yeah.
Right, and that's been an absolute disaster, and that's who owns the majority of large companies now. So
it's market forces more than like legal interpretation. It's not lawyers.
yes.
It's investors.
Yeah.
It's interesting to then, you then start thinking about, well, who should I work for that can do this? And that's when you need to have a private company that isn't at the mercy of shareholders, that can take these strong decisions and make change in a strong way.
Or don't work for a company and go work for the UK government.
Not the whole thing.
I did.
We're all shareholders. I don't want to work
Contracting for the UK government doesn't count. Dean's left, he was here. He's a civil servant.
So why did you quit?
I did
Go work for the US
I did my government service.
Well, Colin, I disagree. It's an interesting point you made, but I disagree in terms of I think middle management are missing it, particularly in big enterprises. I know you're coming from in terms of the CEO, but a lot of us, perhaps from the trenches, see this kind of stuff, and as technologists, we're like, this is crazy. But the companies we work with, Credo, like some of the people in the middle management, like they've obviously they're getting pressure from above. They don't even know about things like Conway. Because I find it, I go to so many microservice talks that Conway is like, I wake up in the night shivering about Conway. But not many people do, which is probably a good thing. But as I go to
middle management at Open Credo.
Sorry?
Aren't you middle management at Open Credo?
No, not really. I don't know. I think so.
Everything's not really, yeah.
No, I don't see myself as middle management, but in terms of bigger, sort of enterprising type companies, like I think some of them to like, actually you see some of this stuff, and there are companies that are disrupting based on some of these things, like your Netflixes, like your Ubers, and it's a cliche, but they are genuinely
I think part of the challenge is that although some companies do have publicly known cell structures, there's not actually anything to copy. And I've also had that. It's like, well, this is all well and good, but who do we copy to do this stuff? Because we don't know. We can't work it out. Just tell me what do we need to look like? And there's no real answer to that. You just kind of have to feel the way through. But there's no time for that because there's so much pressure just to get the money in. So
we're seeing a company now that are looking like Spotify. They go, we're doing drives. It's like,
There's also a thing here of just scale. So all the people who we talked about in terms of innovating and disrupting those the sort of the status quo, and you mentioned Spotify, you mentioned Netflix, you mentioned Uber, are all much smaller than the companies they're disrupting. The scary bit there is the answer to those companies becoming faster, more agile, knocking 90% off the number of people they employ. Because at that point, if all of those companies do that, we have a massive employment crisis across the entire Western world.
If the answer to that, that's when you split companies apart. Like VMware could have took the office. Hang on a minute, this would look more efficient if we split these things out and did that. Yes, smaller chunks.
So part of it come off into Liverpool and the rest get bought by Dell.
Yeah.
I think that's some of the struggle in terms of very large organisations and seeing what are actually smaller organisations. Is it that they're smaller organisations and doing things because they're smaller, or is it because the future of all organisations is much smaller?
There are also younger organizations substantially. Uber has probably only started hiring middle managers 2 years ago. So they haven't had a chance to implement process on a lot of the core business that's been carried over from when they were tiny. And so it's possible that the middle management who slows this down is an artifact of being a larger and older company. And so maybe it's not so much splitting them out, but just keeping them young. No company lasts longer than 5 years. And so you're starting from scratch at maybe a smaller size.
It's like the containers of the...
Yeah. No long running process.
Finally, we should probably talk about platforms.
Okay.
Well, I want to talk about platforms, though. I did think when you were talking about having cross-functional teams, this is very much an old microservices architecture that we're all sort of, normally is embracing, very much specified. It's not the same as code. But it's interesting that when you say, queues, this is a bad thing. In software, queues are kind of the thing everybody's going, this is the way to organise code. So it's kind of interesting.
So how can the platforms cope
So-
with these problems?
Sorry, how can the platforms cope with the problems?
Well, help with all these issues. Can they? Passes and stuff like that, which are making it easier, arguably, for people to deploy applications.
It does make it easier, but it makes it harder because the organisation doesn't know how to cope with that. We saw this the first time around with things like converged infrastructure. So, everyone wants to sell vBlocks, right, to their enterprises. But then you sell a vBlock and no one knows how to actually use unified infrastructure. So they carve it up and they give the network bit to the network guys and the storage bit to the storage guys and the server bit to the server guys. And then I even saw companies physically wanting to chop it up. They bought it for the convenience of a transaction, of having everything in one stack, but then they didn't know how to actually work with the technology in one stack. So I think that in that way, platforms, or PaaS introduces the same types of issues, is that it forces you to converge the people around the organization.
Sorry, Flynn, you're screwed.
We talk to a lot of large organizations like banks who are making the change from very traditional large clusters to not even things like PaaS yet, but just configuration management really. And their biggest challenge is they had entirely manual QA processes. They didn't write tests. Things had a month or 6 months before being deployed, they could be manually, exhaustively tested. And when you say, oh, any developer could ship something in a matter of hours, they start pulling their hair out because you have the chance to move fast and break things, which at telcos you cannot do. We can't just have phone calls not working for a couple of days until we figure out where the rollback button is. And so, it makes things better and it puts on so much more pressure because there's an opportunity to make things much worse at the same time.
Yeah, good. Any other questions before we finish? Okay, thank you.